Robert Louis Stevenson. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Part 8. Henry Jekyll's full statement of the case. I was born in the year 18, into a rich family. I also had good abilities. By nature, I liked to work hard. I cared about the respect of wise and good people around me. Because of this, people thought I would have an honorable and successful future. And in fact, my worst fault was that I was sometimes too cheerful and impatient. This kind of nature has made many people happy, but I found it difficult to combine it with my strong wish to appear serious and important in public. Because of this, I hid my pleasures. When I became older and started to think more about my life, I looked at my progress and my place in the world. At that time, I was already living a deeply double life. Many men would have openly shown such behavior as I was guilty of. But because I had very high standards for myself, I saw these things with strong shame and tried to hide them. So it was not so much my faults themselves, but my high expectations that made me who I was. This also created a deeper division in me than in most men. It separated the good and the bad parts of my nature, which together form the dual nature of man. Because of this, I began to think deeply and constantly about a hard law of life. This law is at the root of religion and is one of the main causes of human suffering. Although I lived a double life, I was not a hypocrite. Both sides of me were completely real. I was no less myself when I stopped controlling myself and fell into shame than when I worked in the daylight to increase knowledge or to help people who suffered. It happened that my scientific studies were focused on mysterious and spiritual things. This had a strong effect on my understanding of the constant struggle inside me. Every day, from both my moral and intellectual thinking, I moved closer to a truth. Because of partly discovering this truth, I have suffered a terrible downfall. The truth is that man is not truly one, but truly two. I say two because my knowledge does not go further than that. Others will continue this work and go further than me in the same direction. I believe that in the end, people will understand that a human is not one being, but a group of many different, conflicting, and independent parts. I, for my part, from the nature of my life, moved surely in one direction only. It was on the moral side, and in myself, that I learned to see the clear and basic dual nature of man. I saw that of the two natures fighting inside my mind, I could be called either one, but only because I was truly both. From an early age, even before my scientific discoveries suggested such a possibility, I liked to think about separating these two parts. It was like a favorite dream. I told myself that if each part could live in a separate identity, life would be free from everything that was hard to bear. The bad side could go its own way, free from the hopes and regrets of the better side. And the good side could walk safely and firmly on its path, doing good things and finding happiness in them, without being brought to shame or regret by the evil side. It was the curse of mankind that these different parts were tied together like this. In the painful mind, these opposite twins were always fighting. How could they be separated? I was thinking about this when, as I have said, a new idea came to me from my work in the laboratory. I began to understand more clearly than ever before how uncertain and unreal this body is, even though it seems so solid. It is like a mist that does not last. I found that some substances could shake and pull away this body, just as the wind can move the curtains of a tent. For two reasons, I will not explain this scientific part in detail. First, I have learned that the burden and fate of our life will always stay with man. If we try to throw it away, it returns with even stronger and more terrible force. Second, as my story will sadly show, my discoveries were not complete. It is enough to say that I not only understood my physical body as something that comes from the powers of my spirit, but I also managed to make a drug. This drug could take power away from these forces and replace them with another form and face. This new form was still natural to me, even though it showed the lower and darker parts of my soul. I thought for a long time before I tried this idea in practice. I knew very well that I could die. Any drug that could control and shake the very center of identity might, even with a small overdose or at the wrong moment, completely destroy the soul that I wanted to change. But in the end, the temptation of such a strange and deep discovery was stronger than my fear. I had already prepared my liquid. I immediately bought a large amount of a special salt from a chemical company. I knew from my experiments that this was the last needed ingredient. Late one terrible night, I mixed the substances. I watched them boil and smoke together in the glass. When the reaction stopped, I gathered my courage and drank the potion. Terrible pain followed. My bones felt as if they were breaking. I felt strong sickness and a deep horror in my spirit, worse than at the moment of birth or death. Then the pain quickly began to go away, and I felt better, as if I had recovered from a serious illness. My feelings were strange. They were new and impossible to describe, but also very pleasant. I felt younger, lighter, and happier in my body. Inside, I felt wild and uncontrolled. Many confused and sensual thoughts ran quickly through my mind. I felt free from duty, and I had a strange freedom of the soul that was not innocent. From the first moment of this new life, I knew I was more evil, 10 times more evil, completely controlled by my original bad nature. And this thought made me feel strong and happy, like wine. I stretched out my hands, enjoying these new feelings. At that moment, I suddenly realized that I was smaller. There was no mirror in my room at that time. The one that stands near me now as I write was brought there later for this exact purpose. But the night was already turning into morning. The morning, although still dark, was close to daylight. The people in my house were all deeply asleep. I decided, full of hope and victory, to go in my new form to my bedroom. I crossed the yard. The stars looked down at me, and I felt as if they were watching me with surprise, as if I was the first creature of this kind they had ever seen. I moved quietly through the corridors, like a stranger in my own house. When I reached my room, I saw for the first time the appearance of Edward Hyde. Here I must speak only by theory. I will not say what I know, but what I think is most likely. The evil side of my nature, to which I had now given power, was weaker and less developed than the good side that I had just pushed aside. Also, in my life, which had mostly been a life of effort, virtue, and control, the evil side had been used much less and was less tired. Because of this, I believe that Edward Hyde was much smaller, thinner, and younger than Henry Jekyll. Just as goodness could be seen in the face of one, evil was clearly written on the face of the other. Evil, which I still believe is the deadly side of man, had also left signs of deformity and decay on that body. And yet, when I looked at that ugly figure in the mirror, I did not feel disgust. Instead, I felt a kind of welcome. This, too, was myself. It seemed natural and human. To me, it showed a stronger and clearer spirit. It seemed more complete and simple than the imperfect and divided face I had always called mine. In this, I was probably right. I noticed that when I looked like Edward Hyde, no one could come near me at first without feeling fear in their body. I believe this was because all people are a mix of good and evil, but Edward Hyde alone was pure evil. I stayed only a short time at the mirror. I still had to try the second and final experiment. I needed to see if I had lost my identity forever, and if I would have to run away before daylight from a house that was no longer mine. I hurried back to my laboratory. I prepared and drank the drink again. Once more, I suffered the painful change. Then I returned again to myself, with the character, the size, and the face of Henry Jekyll. That night, I had reached a fatal turning point. If I had approached my discovery with a better and more noble spirit, if I had done the experiment with kind or religious thoughts, everything would have been different. From these pains of death and birth, I would have come out as an angel instead of a monster. The drug did not choose between good and evil. It was neither devilish nor divine. It only opened the doors of the prison of my nature. And like prisoners set free, what was inside came out. At that time, my good side was asleep. My evil side, kept awake by ambition, was ready and quick to take the chance. And so, what appeared was Edward Hyde. Because of this, although I now had two characters and two appearances, one was completely evil, and the other was still the old Henry Jekyll. He was a strange mixture, and I had already lost hope that he could be improved or changed. So the movement was only towards something worse. Even at that time, I had not overcome my dislike of the dull life of study. I was still sometimes cheerful. My pleasures were, to say the least, not respectable. I was also well known, respected, and getting older. Because of this, the double nature of my life became more and more uncomfortable for me. It was in this area that my new power tempted me, until I became its slave. I only had to drink the liquid to immediately leave the body of the respected professor and take on, like a heavy cloak, the body of Edward Hyde. I smiled at this idea. At that time, it seemed funny to me. I made my preparations very carefully. I rented and furnished a house in Soho, the one where the police later found Hyde. I also hired a housekeeper, a person I knew would be silent and without moral concerns. At the same time, I told my servants that a Mr. Hyde, whom I described, would have full freedom and authority in my house in the square. To avoid problems, I even visited the house and made myself known there in my second form. Then I wrote the will that you disliked so much. This was so that if something happened to me as Dr. Jekyll, I could continue as Edward Hyde without losing money. With all this protection, as I believed, I began to enjoy the strange advantages of my situation. Before me, men had hired criminals to do their crimes, while they themselves stayed safe and respected. I was the first to do this for pleasure. I was the first who could live in public as a respected man, and then in a moment, like a schoolboy, throw it all away and jump into freedom. For me, hidden in my disguise, safety was complete. Think about it. I did not even exist. I only needed to enter my laboratory, take a few seconds to mix and drink the liquid that I always had ready, and whatever Edward Hyde had done would disappear like breath on a mirror. And in his place, quietly at home, working late in his study, a man who could laugh at suspicion would be Henry Jekyll. The pleasures that I quickly went to find in my disguise were, as I have said, not respectable. I can hardly use a stronger word. But in the hands of Edward Hyde, they soon became horrible. When I returned from these actions, I was often shocked by the evil done in my place. This being, which I had created from my own soul and sent out to act freely, was naturally cruel and evil. Everything he did and thought was about himself. He took pleasure in hurting others, like an animal, and he had no mercy, like a man made of stone. Henry Jekyll was sometimes horrified by what Edward Hyde had done, but the situation was outside normal rules, and slowly weakened the voice of conscience. After all, it was Hyde, and only Hyde, who was guilty. Jekyll was no worse. He returned to his good self unchanged. He would even try, when he could, to repair the harm that Hyde had caused. And so his conscience slept. I do not intend to describe the details of the shameful acts that I allowed, for even now I can hardly admit that I did them. I only want to show the warnings and the steps that led to my punishment. I had one incident which I will only briefly mention, because it had no serious result. I hurt a child, and this made a passerby very angry. I later recognized this man as your relative. The doctor and the child's family joined him. For a moment, I feared for my life. In the end, to calm their justified anger, Edward Hyde had to take them to the door and pay them with a check signed in the name of Henry Jekyll. This danger was later easily avoided by opening a bank account in the name of Edward Hyde. Then, by changing my handwriting, I gave my second self his own signature. After that, I believed I was safe from fate. About 2 months before the murder of Sir Danvers, I had gone out for one of my adventures. I returned late and woke the next day in bed with strange feelings. I looked around, but it did not help. I saw the proper furniture and the large shape of my room in the square. I recognized the pattern of the bed curtains and the design of the wooden frame. But something inside me kept telling me that I was not where I seemed to be. It told me that I had not woken in this room, but in the small room in Soho where I usually slept as Edward Hyde. I smiled to myself. In my usual thoughtful way, I began to slowly examine this strange feeling. Sometimes, while thinking, I fell back into a light sleep. I was still doing this when, in a more awake moment, I looked at my hand. The hand of Henry Jekyll, as you have often noticed, was professional in shape and size. It was large, strong, white, and pleasant to look at. But the hand I now saw, clearly in the yellow morning light of London, lying half-closed on the bed, was thin, with strong lines, with visible joints, of a dark, pale color, and covered with dark hair. It was the hand of Edward Hyde. I must have looked at it for almost half a minute. I was so surprised that I could not think clearly. Then suddenly, fear rose in me like a loud crash. I jumped out of bed and ran to the mirror. When I saw myself, my blood felt cold and thin. Yes, I had gone to bed as Henry Jekyll, but I had woken as Edward Hyde. How could this be explained? I asked myself. Then another fear came. How could it be fixed? It was already morning. The servants were awake. All my drugs were in the cabinet. To reach it, I had to go down 2 flights of stairs, through the back passage, across the open yard, and through the anatomical theater. And I stood there full of horror. It might have been possible to cover my face, but what use was that when I could not hide the change in my size? Then, with great relief, I remembered that the servants were already used to seeing my second self. I quickly dressed as well as I could, in clothes that did not fit me. I went through the house, where Bradshaw looked at me in surprise and stepped back when he saw Mr. Hyde at such an early hour and in such strange clothes. 10 minutes later, Dr. Jekyll was back in his own form and sat down with a serious face, pretending to eat breakfast. I had almost no appetite. This strange event, this opposite result of what I had experienced before, seemed like a warning of my fate. It was as if it was writing out the message of my judgment. I began to think more seriously than ever about the results and dangers of my double life. The part of me that I could send out into the world had recently been used and fed a lot. It seemed to me that the body of Edward Hyde had grown bigger. When I was in that form, I felt stronger, with more energy in my blood. I began to see a danger. If this continued, the balance of my nature might be broken forever. I might lose the ability to change back, and the character of Edward Hyde might become permanently mine. The power of the drug had not always worked the same way. Once, Early in my experiments, it completely failed. Since then, I sometimes had to take twice the amount, and once even 3 times, with a great risk of death. These rare problems had been the only worry in my otherwise satisfied life. But now, after what happened that morning, I noticed something new. At first, the problem had been to get rid of the body of Jekyll. But recently, the difficulty had slowly moved to the other side. Everything seemed to show that I was slowly losing control of my original and better self, and slowly becoming my second and worse self.